I fish because I love to, because I love the environs where trout are found, because I suspect that men are going along this way for the last time, and I for one don't want to waste the trip. And finally, not because I regard fishing as being terribly important, but because I suspect that so many of the other concerns of men are equally unimportant, and not nearly so much fun. John D. Volker, also known as Robert Draper. Welcome to Warfare, Advancement, and Revisionism. My name is Preston Floyd, and as always, I am your host. I'd like to thank everyone for continuing to listen. It's been a very, very nice couple of weeks since we've added a couple of other feeds. I've gotten over 200 downloads for the month of August, which is by far and away the most I've had for a single month. And it's way more than I expected this early in the podcast's life. I was expecting, I figured if I were lucky, I'd maybe have 200 in a year. But, here we are, and it's really grown. So I thank everyone for listening, and I hope you continue to do so, and you'll continue to enjoy. But for now, let's go ahead and get on into this week's episode. And we will be finishing up Europe at 10,000 BCE. And, let's go ahead and just get started. So, last week we talked about the various material cultures, or tool complexes, as they're also sometimes called in Europe, and specifically Central and Western Europe. And we also talked about their traditional territory and that kind of thing. Now, for the East, I mentioned that we were in the late Epigravidian period, and that they were starting to see other cultures form either in or around their traditional territories. Now, these cultures in the East aren't quite as well as attested as those ones we discussed last week in the West and the Central European region, but there is one that stands out, and that is the Iron Gates Mesolithic. Now, the name Iron Gates refers to a region of the Danube River that partly divides Romania and Serbia in the modern day. It also divides the Carpathian and Balkan mountain ranges. The region is an area around 134 kilometers, which is, I think, about 85 miles, give or take. And this culture began to become distinct around 13,000 BCE, and it's going to last to about 6,000 BCE. And we have found a large number of unique artifacts from these people, including decorated objects like tools made from stone and bone, antler, and decorations on those. And later in the timeline, there's going to be stone artifacts that are larger, are slightly more kind of megalithic, ornamental boulders, altars, sculptures, and things like that. And the major site for this culture is known as Lipinski Vir, and it probably doesn't exist just yet, but within 100 years or so, it's going to become kind of the epicenter for this culture. Now, this site is a very interesting location for a number of reasons, and I'm definitely going to be coming back into this region and go into a really further detail about it when we return to the area, to this area in the timeline. I'm looking forward to that a lot. But for now, what you need to know about this culture is that their sites are excellent examples of gradually increasing sedentism in Europe. And this is something I've only briefly mentioned, and I probably should have gone into it a little bit more detail earlier. But there is a small but steady rise in people living a sedentary lifestyle. And this seems to be done for a combination of three reasons. First, it's done because groups can no longer access a large amount of herd animals or for food and resources, which is an escalating problem due to the megafauna dying off at around this time frame. Secondly, is done by peoples that had access to an abundance of gatherable resources used for tools, fuel, for fire, clothes, medicine, and things like that. Finally, there was always either a bountiful, kind of diverse sources of food, or a single massive source of food with a few smaller satellite sources that kind of offer a bit more diversity to your diet. So, as an example of that first type of site, you might be in a central location on a plain by a small pond or stream, lake, river, whatever, near several different kind of biospheres around that region. And you would rotate where you would gather for seasonal sources of food or material. You say you might take advantage of a nearby forest in the fall when fruits like apples ripen, and in the spring you would harvest wildflowers like dandelions or nettles or whatever from hills and mountainsides. Now there are other things that could be eaten year-round from those places as well, and that is a strength. But living in a place near a number of locales like that drop the amount of migration that needs to happen, because you're not having to deplete all of the resources at once. You're giving the environment more time to recover. Now, of course, this diet is supplemented with hunting and fishing, but hunting would be more seasonal, and longer journeys following herds would gradually stop. Lipinski Vir and the surrounding companion sites are an example of one massive source of food surrounded by supplementary sources. The Danube River was the primary source of life to the Iron Gates Mesolithic. Carp, sturgeon, catfish would be caught year-round, while other fish were eaten seasonally. And of course, other animals were eaten as well, things like aurochs, deer, and even dogs. But fish would always be the most eaten meat, though. Now, there are still plenty more mobile hunter-gatherer bands than sedentary bands, and that will be the case for a very long time. But this increasing sedentism is happening in a number of locales around the world. I mentioned a couple of examples of these sites in Asia, like Göbekli Tepe and Jericho. And I know this is an idea that might sound alien to someone who has only gone through, say a standard primary school education in America, as an example. That's my frame of reference. Or someone who's maybe done a non-historical focused education in college. They would probably think the same thing. Typically, history has taught that sedentism starts with our reliance on agriculture. But there is more and more evidence that we were already experimenting with sedentism by the time we kind of developed fixed field agriculture. And we're going to go into that a lot more when we start to focus on the episodes getting to the kind of 8000 BCE time frame. Now, though, from all the groups in the last two episodes we have talked about, we have evidence of some type of spiritual, ritual, or non-utilitarian artifacts. We have impressive cave paintings in France and Spain showing a kind of potential concept of an underworld, and that this is a place of all types of spirits, and with people visiting them to perhaps draw animal spirits out to summon them in the real world. And there are, of course, the various Venus figures of Central and Eastern Europe that bear some similarities to each other, which could speak of some type of mother goddess that was worshipped. And of course, these were found at different sites from various groups at different times. It is certainly possible that these artifacts depicted different figures, and it may not have been a specific goddess, but instead just kind of a generic concept of a mother goddess figure. And perhaps this was some it's also possible that this could have been some proto-figure that played some part in a forgotten myth that eventually became more distinct and defined among various different breakaway groups. Or maybe it was just like that one theory says, and it was just pornographic. Now, as for the languages of these groups, we don't have really anything to go on. The languages spoken in Europe today are from later peoples migrating into the region at a later time. The only traces of them that we may have, and this is a may, are place or water names, toponyms for place, hydronyms for water sources. And even most of those have been transmitted by other groups with their own kind of takes on pronunciation. So, take that as you will. So even if the name is the original name, it's not close to how it was originally pronounced, and you can't reconstruct a language with just a place name, unfortunately. So it's kind of a moot point at this juncture. That being said, there is in fact only one language in Europe that may be a descendant of these initial groups, and that language being Euskara, or as more widely known, Basque. And even that isn't a certain thing, and if it is the case, Basque still has many words taken from neighboring tongues as bordered during its history. It does have a fair amount of vocabulary from things like French and Spanish. So take that as you will. Just be aware that Basque may definitely be a descendant of one of the original European languages, but it is not a wholly indigenous language. It definitely has a lot of loan words and things like that. Now, I should go back and make a point about sedentism. Even some of the groups that are practicing some type of sedentism now does not mean that they would be remaining sedentary. They may fall back into hunting and gathering and being migratory. That's definitely something that could happen, not just in the Iron Gates, but places in Asia as well. And then of course, once you go back to migration, that may kind of signal the end of a tool complex. That could kind of change the amount of the types of tools you're creating, and that could be contributing to these cultures kind of breaking up and reforming as different groups. We don't know. I think that there's kind of this thought in history, education, and that kind of thing that once you settle down in a single place, you stop moving. Once we become quote unquote sedentary, that's it. That is now you're on the cultural path to being farmers and city dwellers, and there's not anything that's going to change that, because that is quote unquote the superior type of lifestyle. We're going to see that is not the case. There is many examples of sedentary people even later, once agriculture has been firmly established, that they revert to the old ways, as it were. They return to use an internet meme, they return to monkey, just to kind of make that connection. But again, that's something we're going to be focused on here in the future. Now, for kind of the rest of Southern Europe, things south of Romania and Serbia and the rest of the Balkans, we don't have a whole lot in terms of material culture except for late Epigravidian. But as time goes on, the Epigravidian kind of retreats back to its initial homeland in Southern Europe, Italy. There is also, of course, the people living on the islands in the Mediterranean. I know we talked about Cyprus kind of as an extension of Asia. However, in the central Mediterranean, you have the islands of Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and even Malta. Now, there is a little bit of a controversy on timing for these locations. There is definitely evidence of some type of hominid prior to Homo sapiens getting to Europe, and very old hominids at that. Probably some type of predecessor to the Neanderthals were living there to at least an extent. During ice ages in the past, Corsica and Sardinia were connected to each other. They were the same landmass. and then of course due to those lower ice levels, the lower water levels for that time, getting to those that island, I guess as it would be at the time, from Italy was less of an issue. Now, when Homo sapiens arrived, that's when we're getting into the controversy. I think the oldest humans that have been firmly identified as Homo sapien on Sardinia goes back to about 7,000 BC, whereas I think there is some debate that there may have been there have been remains found in Corsica that could be older, but they could also be younger. There is some debate, but there is obsidian from Sardinia in southern Corsica that shows that crossing over was probably regular even once the water level had risen. But again, we're just not sure of the exact dates of human habitation or Homo sapien habitation once humans get to Europe. But we do have a lot more future kind of cultures to talk about. Now, Malta, for those of you who don't know, is a small couple of islands to the south of Sicily, and then it's to the east of what is now Tunisia. That is another one that has some prehistoric origins. I think, from what we understand, humans probably don't get there to about 5,000 or so, give or take, BCE. I don't think there's been any evidence that anything has been there prior to that. Like, there were no other hominids, as far as I know, that lived there. So that is, as yet, unoccupied by humans of any variety. Now, Sicily, of course, that little triangle island to the southwest of Italy, there has been evidence of older hominids there. As far as I'm aware, they're, I think, just standard Neanderthal stuff, not in huge numbers, as far as I know, which could kind of point to possibly, the Neanderthals not quite liking warmer climes. At least that's one theory, but it's hard to say. But we know for sure that there have been some type of humans living there since at least 8,000 BCE. So before Sardinia, at least from what we found, again, I'm always of the opinion that the oldest thing we found is not the oldest thing there. I'm willing to bet that there are Homo sapiens living on those islands at this point in time, but it's probably a very small number. That being said, Sicily is home to their own version of hippos and elephants. So like Cyprus, they kind of have these pygmy versions of these African animals. Of course, they die out very quickly, especially once humans arrive. This is one, I think, that it's firmly okay to say humans definitely were the death knell for those, not just the environment. So that is the Mediterranean islands. So I talked about last time how the Scandinavia it's probably not going to be inhabited again for a couple of 100 years from this point. That also applies to parts of what is now Russia. There's kind of like a little corridor between Central Europe and Northeast. So if you think about the map today, Central Europe being Germany and Poland, and then you have like Hungary, Belarus, Ukraine, and then kind of the southwest of Russia. That's probably inhabited. Unfortunately, we don't have too much. At least I couldn't find too much information about specific cultures. But around the Black Sea, I know we've discussed the Epigravidian there. And as, of course, you get back towards the Asia side of the Urals, You're getting to the Caucasus, which definitely has a little bit of overlap. Unfortunately, again, I just couldn't find too many sources on specific characteristics of those cultures. But they are unique, I think that's fair to say. And they definitely have some influence with the nearby steppe peoples of Asia, which is going to become important over the next couple of thousand years. So that's kind of, again, Eastern Europe's a little bit harder to get some solid sources on. But I do look forward to going back there because it's a very interesting region when we get to the domestication of the horse and to learning about the predecessors of modern Europeans and their languages. So I do look forward to that. But I think that's probably a good stopping point. This has been a shorter episode this week. There's just not quite as much to go on, sadly, as the other bit of Europe. But, yeah, I think this is a good place to stop. I think that's good coverage for Europe at 10,000 BCE. Next week, we will be back to... I'm going to continue on. We're going to do the Americas. There's actually not a whole lot to really talk about that's firm. I'm going to get into some kind of supposition and questioning kind of what we know and how we know it. I'm going to kind of go over some revision that has happened because we'll be discussing what's known as the Clovis culture and how they have been considered to be the first humans in North America, but how they're also now probably not, considering we've got a lot more sources and excavations going on. But unfortunately, there's not going to be too much I can get into to really get into the specifics. But there is, we are going to be talking about maybe Homo sapiens were not the first hominids to get into the Americas. There's been a little discovery of something called the Cerruti mammoth, and I'm going to kind of go over some of that. And we're going to have a little bit of a kind of some guesswork going on to kind of supplement the very short episode that would be the Americas at 10,000 BC. So we're going to go over some firm stuff, but we're also going to theorize a little bit as well. So I hope you look forward to that. So that will be this upcoming weekend. And then after that, we're going to kind of go over some developments in technology, or at least we're going to go over domestication of both some animals, and then so just to kind of maybe going over some possibilities for some crops. I might need to wait a little bit on that episode. We'll have to see, but I just want to go over some animals that we're dealing with at this time since the megafauna have died off. And then we're going to jump to about 8,000 BCE. And we'll kind of go back along kind of how we have done up to this point for, I guess, what you would consider season 3 of the podcast. And it'll be another couple of groups. There's more information to go on for a few more of these regions. And we'll check back in with some of the peoples we've talked about. So jump forward about 2,000 years, and there are some bigger things that are happening between those times that, again, it's just going to have like a filler episode or two. So we'll see about that. But yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. And yeah, I hope you have a good rest of your day. If you have any feedback, please feel free to get to me at waradrevpod@gmail.com, or you can direct message me on the podcast's Twitter feed if you have Twitter. But yeah, have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.